Criticism is growing about the World Health Organization's handling of the pandemic and its soft stance against Beijing. We take a look at the Chinese regime's influence over the organization and particularly on the Taiwan issue. A kid crying out for help on Chinese social media, saying his mother was taken away by police for speaking up for a fellow resident. A family from Wuhan made it out in the nick of time and told us how the CCP covered up the seriousness of the epidemic. Countries hit the hardest by the virus seem to share one common thread, and today we take a look at Ecuador. Regions of China long blanketed in smog, but with the usual culprits such as car emissions and factories out of action, netizens questioning the current cause. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. We reported yesterday the northeastern city of Harbin is facing a serious situation. Now another northeastern city, Fushun, is worsening. At least one market, one supermarket, and one residential area have been put on lockdown. In Harbin, the epidemic is almost out of control, as is the air pollution. This video was taken at 10 a.m. April 18th. The whole city covered in smog. You can't even see the cars in front of you. Harbin citizens say it's very hard to bear. According to Chinese media, the PM 2.5 figure at that time was 2,300 micrograms per cubic meter. Some other cities close to Harbin have a similar problem. The air is considered very unhealthy if the figure is higher than 200, and anyone with heart or lung disease, older adults, and children should avoid all physical activity outdoors. Everyone else should avoid prolonged or heavy exertion. The situation in Harbin is 10 times as bad. Smog has been a common problem in China for years. Authorities say the main contributor is car emissions. Second is burning coal. Third is factories, and fourth, the dust from construction sites and streets. During the outbreak, there are very few cars on the street and many factories are still closed. So state media are blaming burning straw. But not everyone's convinced. One netizen says the problem can't be explained by farmers burning straw and car emissions. And early trials of an experimental antiviral drug are looking promising. California-based company Gilead Sciences have found remdesivir could be effective against the coronavirus and have begun human trials. Of the 53 patients that were tested, nearly 70% showed signs of improvement 18 days after the first dose. Nearly half of the patients were discharged from the hospital. And another hospital in Chicago also saw positive results. According to Stat News, remdesivir was given to 125 hospitalized virus patients. Within days of treatment, most of the patients were discharged. Remdesivir is not yet licensed or approved, but result tests like these are encouraging. And Spanish doctors say foot sores may be a new symptom of the virus. They say the lesions are similar to those seen with chickenpox. They mostly appear in children and teenagers, although some adults also get them. According to the doctor's statement, numerous cases are being observed in different countries: Italy, France, Spain. It is a curious finding. In a recent post circulating on Chinese social media, a child said his mother was taken away by police. He said a man was arrested because he sold vegetables at a flat rate, and his mom was just defending him. The boy added he hoped his community could help him raise money for a lawyer to defend his mom. In the chat, he wrote that his mom is the only one who takes care of him. Now he can't concentrate when he studies, and he can't sleep. He says he hopes they can help his mom. Residents in Hubei province were mostly forbidden from leaving their homes during lockdown. The community's management could get groceries for their area and sell it to the residents. However, many residents complain that the management sold the groceries at a high price. The child wrote when a man who was selling vegetables for a flat rate was arrested, his mother and other residents objected. On March 26, she was taken away for investigation and has since never returned. On April 9th, she was officially detained. A detention notice from the police bureau said it was because she was causing trouble. Another post, which netizens said is from the same community, blames the regime's officials for detaining innocent people trying to speak up for fellow residents, while doing nothing about those who try to profit off innocent people, adding, "Do not let them be slaughtered silently. Don't ignore it when your neighbors suffer. We must find a way to bring those good people back alive, no longer suffering in prison." As bodies are left on the streets and temporary morgues are built outside hospitals, Ecuador's virus deaths are pushing local funeral homes to the brink. With a shortage of wooden coffins, the government is forced to use cardboard ones. Ecuador is one of the hardest hit countries in South America. Crude oil is its main source of revenue, but its key pipeline broke early April. Most of its exports are now halted. Ecuador's President Lenin Moreno says the country is facing an unprecedented economic emergency. Those countries hit hardest by the virus appear to have one thing in common: close ties with the Chinese Communist Party. Italy, for example, is the worst hit country in Europe, with over 23,000 deaths. In 2019, it signed on to China's Belt and Road Initiative despite warnings from allies. It even has Chinese police officers patrolling its streets. Ecuador likewise has ties to the CCP. With help from Chinese loans and workers, Ecuador's largest energy project started taking shape in 2010. It's called the Coca-Cola Sinclair Dam. The New York Times reported the dam was to provide a third of Ecuador's electricity and lift the country out of poverty. Instead, the project was a disaster. The dam sits under an active volcano, its machinery lined with cracks due to low-quality steel. When workers try to run it at full throttle, it's shorted the country's national grid. Now it only runs at half capacity. But Ecuador still has to pay China. It owes $19 billion for the dam and other infrastructure projects, and China wants it paid in oil, Ecuador's most valuable export. It now has the right to 80% of it, an incredible figure. And not only that, China gets the oil at a discount, reselling it for a profit. Critics call China's lending practices debt diplomacy. In recent years, Beijing poured billions of dollars into developing countries to help build their infrastructure. When countries can't repay the loans, Beijing then seizes control of their key assets. Ecuador owes China more money than it owes any other country. The political influence is obvious. Ecuador has waived visa requirements for Chinese tourists. In 2015, under pressure from China, a local cultural center canceled Shenyun a week before the performance. Shenyun is a classical Chinese dance show, which also depicts human rights abuses in China. China also financed and built the country's National Emergency Response System. It's a vast surveillance system with 4,500 cameras in 16 regional response centers. The surveillance system was largely built by Huawei and the Chinese state-controlled corporation. Chinese leader Xi Jinping visited the surveillance system's headquarters in 2016. He said he's glad to see Chinese companies achieving great things in Ecuador and hopes they can contribute more to the relationship between the two countries. The WHO is facing increasing pressure to answer criticism for the way it's handled the pandemic and the way it's treated China. Today, we take a look at the Chinese Communist regime's influence on the WHO.
The World Health Organization is facing rising criticism for its handling of the pandemic. Critics say the UN agency was slow to respond and downplayed the threat. They point to Taiwan alerting the WHO on December 31st about the risk of human-to-human transmission as one example. 2 weeks later, on January 14th, the agency repeated Beijing's claim, saying there's no clear evidence of it. Its director general was also slammed for praising the Chinese regime's response despite evidence of a cover-up, which we previously reported on. This is from Beijing's overseas mouthpiece.
By taking decisive and strong measures, the Chinese government ensured to the highest possible extent the life, safety, and health of the Chinese people, and brought precious time for stemming the global spread of the virus. China has always been open, transparent, and responsible in all its efforts.
And here's the WHO Director General.
The speed with which China detected the outbreak, isolated the virus, sequenced the genome, and shared it with WHO and the world are very impressive and beyond words. So is China's commitment to transparency and to supporting other countries.
The WHO didn't always toe the line of the Communist Party. In 2003, during the SARS outbreak, the then Director General publicly criticized the Chinese regime for not reporting the first cases quickly. The agency issued its first travel alert in over 50 years, telling people not to go to Guangdong province. But in recent years, the Chinese regime has sought to grow its influence in international bodies, especially in the UN, including the World Health Organization. In 2006, former health director of Hong Kong, Margaret Chan, became the WHO's Director General and the first Chinese to hold a top UN position. She had previously been criticized by Hong Kong lawmakers for not pressuring Beijing to share more information during the SARS outbreak. Following Chan's tenure, lasting 10 years, Beijing helped Tedros Adhanom to the top post in the WHO's 2017 election.
Appoints Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus as Director General of the World Health Organization.
The Taiwan issue is the clearest example of Beijing's influence on the WHO. Just one day after he was elected, Tedros told Chinese state-run media that he will abide by the One China policy, meaning continue to bar Taiwan from the organization. Taiwan, officially known as the Republic of China, is a self-governing island off the coast of mainland China. It's home to nearly 24 million people. One of Taiwan's major opposition parties today was once the ruling party in mainland China. The Kuomintang retreated to the island in the 1940s when the Communist Party took over the mainland. Although it never ruled Taiwan, the Chinese Communist regime sees the island as its own and tries to block it from joining any international bodies unless on its terms. Before 1971, Taiwan was a member of the UN, but in that year, the UN recognized the communist regime as the only legitimate government of China. Taiwan was then kicked out of the UN and the WHO. Taiwan has been trying to join the WHO for over 2 decades, but Beijing has successfully blocked it, and because of that, Taiwan couldn't get access to information and medical resources that were shared within the organization in a timely manner.
China is actively lobbying against Taiwan's inclusion in these summit meetings, part of its larger effort to squeeze Taiwan out of the international community.
Next is a clip from the 2006 World Health Assembly at which Wu Yi, the Chinese vice premier at that time, objected to Taiwan's participation. This is an exchange between a Taiwanese reporter and a Chinese official after the meeting. In 2009, Taiwan was allowed limited participation called observer status with Beijing's consent because at that time, Taiwan's president Ma Ying-jeou was friendly with the regime. But after Tsai Ing-wen came to power in 2016 and with her tough stance against Beijing, Taiwan's observer status was stripped away. In recent years, the U.S. has been trying to get Taiwan observer status so it can join the WHO's annual meeting.
Taiwan has been totally excluded from participating at the WHO's annual World Health Assembly for 2 years running. Ultimately, Taiwan's expulsion from the WHO illustrates a broader trend. Taiwan is a model democracy that makes the world better, while China is a revisionist, authoritarian power that places the world at risk.
A Heritage Foundation report last year says China is interested in expanding its influence within the UN, not because it supports the founding principles of the UN, but in order to shift the values, programs, and policies of the UN in ways that benefit Chinese priorities and ideology. But it turns out this time, Taiwan's exclusion benefited them. Already wary of information coming from Beijing, the island started screening travelers from Wuhan as early as December 31st. That's 3 weeks before the Chinese regime told the public there was human-to-human transmission. In a recent interview with our sister media, the Epoch Times, William Stanton praised Taiwan's success in containing the virus. He is a former director of the American Institute in Taiwan, the equivalent of an ambassador.
And yet it's really managed to control the spread of the virus. And I think that reflects well on the medical system they have here. But I think it also speaks enormously well for the measures that the Taiwanese adopted from early on, sometimes contrary to what they were being told, the little that they were told by the PRC government officials they met with, but also quite different from what the WHO was saying.
Stanton hopes the U.S. and other countries can learn from Taiwan's example and work more closely with them.
Taiwan so far has about 400 cases and 6 deaths, an impressive record. On Friday, in a surprise move, one senior WHO official said Taiwan's response, quote, deserves praise. A family of 4 caught the last flight evacuating American citizens from Wuhan. They tell us what they saw of the Ccp'S cover-up that went on to cost thousands of lives around the world. NTD Xu Wenrong has the story.
Leo and her family of 4 caught the last flight from Wuhan to America as the U.S. began evacuating citizens from the virus epicenter.
Many families in Wuhan died, but the media didn't report it. They're covering it up. Even many people who are financially well off can't find a hospital to stay.
Chinese authorities have been covering up the CCP virus since December. It didn't announce human-to-human transmission until January 20th. On January 19th, Liu brought someone with a fever to the hospital.
When I got back from the hospital, I told my husband that the Chinese Communist Party were lying again. By then, the doctors were already wearing full protective gear and goggles.
She stayed at the hospital from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. There was a long waiting line for the emergency department, and the hallway and ward was full of people.
Wuhan has quite a lot of hospitals, and there should be enough medical equipment. So if everywhere is full, the official data must be fake.
A friend told her that Wuhan Central Hospital, where Li Wenliang worked, had the most infections.
More than half of the medical staff at the hospital are infected. The director of respiratory medicine and the director of ophthalmology all died from the virus. Transmission between medical staff didn't stop. Doctors and nurses were heartbroken, watching their colleagues fall one by one.
Liu says that at one hospital, the medical staff's phones are monitored. They're not allowed to talk about the epidemic.
The wife of one of my former colleagues has only got 2 days off since January. That was for the Chinese New Year. She basically lives in the hospital. She's not allowed to go home. And if she resigns, they'll take away her medical degree.
On April 8th, Wuhan lifted its lockdown after the regime reported 0 new cases for about a week. However, a frontline nurse who was infected herself told Liu that the hospital simply doesn't report cases anymore.
Wuhan is still saying there are 0 new cases, but how's that possible? Chat groups for our residential block and former classmates always say one case was found here and another case was found there. Now they don't report asymptomatic cases as confirmed cases, and there are also people who recover but get sick again. Those also aren't counted.
She said the situation inside Wuhan is much worse than the regime reports.
The situation in Wuhan was so bad. We stayed at home for more than 10 days and did not go out at all. Our family of 4 had to eat, but if we had to go out to buy food, we risked infection.
She said if they'd stayed in Wuhan and caught the virus, they could do nothing but wait to die in their home. Reporting by Xu Wenrong, NTD News.
Thank you very much.
At the Coronavirus Task Force press conference today, President Trump hit back at reports that the U.S. has more deaths than any other country.
Number one, but we're not number one. China's number one, just so you understand. China's number one by a lot. It's not even close. They're way ahead of us in terms of death. It's not even close. You know it, I know it, they know it.
Later, response coordinator Deborah Birx showed a list of countries by mortality rate. The graph showed that Belgium had the highest deaths per capita, 45 per 100,000 people. The U.S. with a much lower 11 deaths per 100,000. President Trump then interrupted Birx to ask if anyone believes China's figure of 0.33.
Does anybody believe this number? Does anybody believe this number? You saw more bags on television than that.
Birx saying she put the figure there to show how unrealistic China's figures are. The president was then asked if China would face consequences for the outbreak.
Well, if they were knowingly responsible, certainly. If it was a mistake is a mistake. But if they were knowingly responsible, yeah, then there should be consequences. In either event, they should have let us go in. You know, we asked to go in very early, and they didn't want us in. I think they were embarrassed. I think they knew it was something bad, and I think they were embarrassed.
And turning to Facebook, the social media company is now flagging content it identifies as misinformation about the virus. But our sister media company found one of its fact-checkers wrongly flagged their documentary.
Tracking down the origin of the Wuhan coronavirus is a documentary investigating the virus's origin. It has tens of millions of views online, but under Facebook's new guidelines, links to the film have been flagged as having false information. This is part of the company's latest effort to fight misinformation about the virus, and it says it does so with the help of independent fact-checkers. Facebook fact-checker Daniel Anderson said the film's claim the virus may have leaked from the Wuhan Institute of Virology due to failures in biosecurity is false. But our sister company, the Epoch Times, found that this fact-checker is not independent. Anderson says herself that she's worked at the Wuhan lab at various times over the past 2 years. What's more, the Washington Post found that the U.S. Embassy has twice reported the Wuhan lab to Washington for inadequate safety. The Epoch Times has called on Facebook to remove the incorrect label and said it agreed with a statement made by its CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, last year that, as a principle, in a democracy, people should decide what is credible, not tech companies. NTD News, New York.
Help is on the way for America's farmers. President Trump yesterday announced a $19 billion relief program for the agricultural industry.
On Friday, the president announced the COVID-19 food assistance program.
The Department of Agriculture will be implementing a $19 billion relief program for our great farmers and ranchers as they cope with the fallout of the global pandemic.
The new program includes $16 billion in direct payments for farmers, ranchers, and producers. It also gives $3 billion to the U.S. Department of Agriculture so it can purchase fresh produce, dairy, and meat products from the farmers. The agency will then redistribute it to community food banks and other nonprofits and faith-based organizations.
Having to dump milk or plow under vegetables ready to market is not only financially distressing, but it's heartbreaking as well to those who produce them.
Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue added the program will help fellow Americans in need. According to a USDA statement, the U.S. will begin purchasing an estimated $100 million per month each of fresh fruits and vegetables, dairy products, and meat products. The aid comes as long lines have formed at U.S. food banks in recent weeks, as millions have become unemployed due to lockdowns to halt the spread of the CCP virus.
As states look forward to opening up, officials want to ramp up testing. And Vice President Pence assured states on Friday that they have enough tests to go around. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more.
On Friday, Vice President Pence suggested that the U.S. is in good supply of an important ingredient for opening up the country.
Our best scientists and health experts assess that states today have enough tests to implement the criteria of Phase 1 if they choose to do so.
He also said he thinks that states can more than double their daily testing by activating more labs. Private companies are also offering testing, like in some states where Rite Aid is testing people for free. As of Thursday, over 3.7 million tests have been completed in the U.S., but Dr. Fauci said that testing is just a part of Phase 1.
The emphasis that we've been hearing is essentially testing is everything, and it isn't. It's the kinds of things that we've been doing, the mitigation strategies that are an important part of that.
While the country is moving forward, President Trump went over the expected death toll.
And I think right now we're heading at probably around 60, maybe 65,000. And one is too many. I always say it, one is too many. It's a horrible thing that happened to our country.
As of Saturday, over 31,400 have died from the virus in the U.S. and over 694,000 have tested positive. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the closed border with the U.S. will continue. He spoke outside his Ottawa home, where he remains under self-isolation.
Good morning, everyone. I want to start today by confirming that Canada and the United States have agreed to extend by another 30 days the border measures that are currently in place.
Trudeau said closing the border has helped lessen CCP virus cases in Canada. He added closing the border to international travelers naturally included closing the border with the U.S., but he stressed that the U.S. is Canada's most important trade partner. Even if New Yorkers can't go to work or do much of anything else for now, they can still get married. Governor Andrew Cuomo announced in a tweet today that his newest executive order will allow people to get a marriage license remotely, and that clerks can hold the ceremonies via video conference. New York sees its lowest number of daily deaths in 2 weeks, and New York City, the state's hotspot, is opening 10 more testing sites. NTD's Melina Weiskup has more on New York.
New York's CCP virus numbers are all on the downward slope. The death toll for the past 3 days is under 700, a hopeful new trend compared to previous weeks. The latest updates show the CCP virus has taken thousands of New Yorkers' lives. The official count is nearly 18,000, but now some deaths are counted as probable ones. That refers to those who died without confirmed test results. And a nursing home in Brooklyn has seen the highest number of deaths than any other in the state, 55 elderly people passing away. But the nursing home says they cannot confirm all deaths are from the virus. As for the state's testing situation, Governor Cuomo said manufacturers aren't lacking equipment, but instead the needed chemicals.
They say one of two things. I can't get more reagents because they come from China, they come from here, they come from here. We don't make them in the United States.
But it seems the state's hotspot, New York City, has enough testing capacity for now. The city's mayor said he is opening 10 more testing sites.
Beyond the ones I mentioned previously, 5 additional test sites, 1 per borough.
Test priority goes to the most vulnerable, like the elderly and those with pre-existing conditions. Essential workers and healthcare professionals are also included. Melina Weiskup, NTD News, New York.
The mayor said some test sites in Brooklyn and Queens will open today, followed by others on Monday. Washington, D.C. residents line up for free food at a school that wants to make sure locals don't go hungry while the closures affect the nation.
Locals line up for food at Washington's Maya Angelou Public Charter School. The school is handing out food to those in need during the CCP virus pandemic. Staff are preparing 150 meals every week while the school stays shut.
We have frozen Salisbury steak, chicken, hot dogs, hot dog buns. We have everything. We have a lot.
Many residents wear face coverings and gloves as they collect food. The school also gives people a way to make their own face coverings.
Another item that we are giving out today are mask kits. As a team, we cut out material, various materials, as you can see.
The school wanted to make sure the community was fed, since students would otherwise miss meals that they could get at school.
There's a food desert. There's not a grocery store in this area. The urban farm up the street was closed down. So when COVID hit, what are the people supposed to do? They have to eat. So that's the biggest need.
For many families hit by the pandemic, the help comes as a welcome relief.
The D.C. Department of Health reported over 2,400 cases in Washington, D.C., with over 80 people killed by the outbreak so far. In Spain, the number of casualties is still rising, but not as fast as before. The country is finally experiencing a downward trend in hospitalizations.
Spain's death toll rose at a slower pace on Saturday, but surpassed 20,000 total. According to Health Emergency Chief Fernando Simon, the number of people who need treatment or who are dying is on a downward trend. Spain has begun to ease its strict lockdown and open some sectors of the economy. But most people are still confined to their houses. Not even children are allowed out for exercise. In Nigeria, the president's chief of staff has died due to the virus. He was one of the most powerful men of the country. And in Afghanistan, at least 20 officials who worked with the president have contracted the virus, reportedly from a contaminated document. Berlin police broke up an unauthorized demonstration held to protest a rule prohibiting gatherings of more than 2 people. The organizers called for participants to maintain a distance of 6 feet from each other, but some didn't comply. Pollution in Ukraine's capital of Kiev is now the worst in the world. It's due to the forest fires around Chernobyl area where the infamous power plant once was. Chernobyl is around 70 miles from Kiev, but the toxic gas traveled to the capital.
Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased information. Don't forget to subscribe for the latest updates and see you next time.